Hi, everybody. I'm Jason. This is my presentation. I would like to point out that all of the photos in the background are
Nature.
photos that I took, and many of them are from the Milwaukee area. So, my background is that I'm a novice hobbyist taxidermist. I just started doing it this year. This chipmunk was my first project ever. As you can see, there have been some mistakes, but I have since learned from this, and you'll see. I just got my associates from USF in St. Petersburg, Florida. This is a photo of the marina that's right next to the campus that I saw every day, and I just got my associates in environmental science and policy. I graduated from the Audubon Conservation Leadership Initiative last year. I do arts and crafts for fun. I was in TV production recently. I just quit because it sucks. And I make stickers. So, what is taxidermy? The word comes from the Latin roots taxis and dermis. Taxis meaning motion transportation, think like taxi cab, and dermis is as in skin, like dermatology. What taxidermy
Jason, can I
is?
just I think it's a little hard for a couple folks to hear, so maybe I don't know if it's speaking directly into your mic or angling it or something. That'd be awesome. Thank you.
I hope this is a little better. Taxidermy is the preserving and mounting of animal skins for display or study. It can have a little bit of a reputation because hunting and taxidermy kind of um, go hand in hand, and some people have a problem with it. But there are ways that taxidermy can be used in service of ecology. Um, it's important to avoid stereotyping when it comes to practices that relate to taking life because it's very complicated and nuanced. Some people do this in a way that might be considered disrespectful or distasteful or irresponsible, but you never know why a person or group is behaving a certain way until you ask. For instance, invasive species removal is something that I've had passersby ask me about while I'm doing it, because to them, the uninitiated, it just kind of looks like I'm killing trees, but what I'm actually doing is performing an important function to sustain the health of the environment. So, communication is really important to prevent people from being misguided about how we use death in service of helping out the environment. So, some of the ways that taxidermy is involved in that is through education, using mounts and skins as exhibits in visitor centers and museums to help people learn. Preserving traditional practices. This is similar to the proliferation of ethnobotany and trying to record traditional practices so that they can be passed on. Research specimens and extinction for phylogenetic and anatomical study. This photo here is of three extinct birds, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, that are currently in the Field Museum as part of their research collection. Some of the Carolina parakeet um, feather DNA was used in a recent study to kind of track the radiation of conure species throughout the Americas, and that wouldn't have been possible to do without the preservation of these skins. Here is an example of taxidermy being used in an art piece. So this is another bit of information about a Carolina parakeet taxidermy project. So this taxidermist, Derek Frampton, was hired by Audubon to recreate the extinct Carolina parakeet from donor feathers because the original mounts were too old and damaged to be displayed safely. This was in one of their exhibits relating to extinction and extinct species. So I have some projects here. This one actually found at the Urban Ecology Center, who had been ran over by a bicycle, hence the the track marks. So if you look here, you can compare some of the differences between this squirrel and this chipmunk. Obviously, they look morphologically pretty similar. They have similar bodies, but they have features that are also different. So the eastern gray squirrel is from Sciurus carolinensis with 28 accepted Sciurus species. These are all the squirrels of the world. And the chipmunk is Tamias striatus, which only contains the eastern chipmunk, though there are other kinds of chipmunks. This word Tamias refers to housekeeping because of the way that they collect and store nuts. When you look at their faces up close, obviously there's a size difference, but you can also see that they have similar traits like this white fur behind the ears. I think that's because they were found at a similar time of year when these animals are transitioning into their winter coats that have more white. Their whiskers are different lengths and in different arrangements. They have different markings, but all of the same features are there because they are both rodents. Here's a picture of the phylogeny of squirrels and chipmunks. So you can see the Sireni tribe and the Tamias, which is in Marmatini, they share the most common recent ancestor here at 87. So we can see that throughout all of the um, all of the rodents, they're somewhat closely related. So preserving the hides of animals who were killed in accidents is one way to make the best of a loss. Handling them, especially during the skinning process, allows us to look into their private lives and learn some clues about what things were like and are like for them and members of their species. It can be a valuable teaching tool for yourself and for others. It can help people develop a respect for animals. Some only fear them or are apathetic because they don't have access to information. They might not have many opportunities to develop their curiosity. Some have never experienced nearness. And nearness is an important concept, which I will cover a little bit later in this presentation. But this photo is from Devil's Lake, which is the most popular park in the state with, I think, over 1 million visitors every year. And I chose this photo for this background because at Devil's Lake at the visitor center, they have a display of different skins that are kind of suspended on ropes that you can touch. And that was part of what gave me the idea to donate a chipmunk skin to the Urban Ecology Center Riverside because I felt that it was a really good educational display and it was very interesting. Death is a part of life. This is something that convenience strips away from people, this concept. When you think about the structure of sustenance communities, so much bonding between people and so much of the texture of everyday life comes from rituals and knowledge surrounding food and other resources that necessarily are the result of a life being taken. Early cave paintings from the Chauvet caves depict ancient oryx with an accuracy and posture that is numerically more frequently accurate than artwork created thereafter of the domestic cow. This is to say that modern people are able to divorce death from the material things in their lives. This is the way of convenience, and it obscures reality and leads to the state that we're currently in. Here's some basics about taxidermy in my process. So, what I do is I only collect roadkills. And to work on smaller animals, you don't really need a lot of space. What I do is I just try to collect the hides. I have not done any mounting, though I am working currently on a mounting project of this squirrel who doesn't have any stuffing right now, but the object is to create a soft mount, which is different than the traditional hard mount because they're stuffed with polyfill or foam, so you can squish them and kind of manipulate them around. I think that um, my hypothesis is that preserving the hide that way and having a piece that can come out lets you clean the inside easier, so it'll remain pliable and last longer. So the tools that I use are some way to get around, like my car, blades, bags, a lot of salt, citric acid, gloves, disposable, and cut proof. That's important. Tanning solution and a bucket for the pickle. The steps in the process are finding something to collect, skinning, giving thanks, salt dry. So that's when you coat the inner surface with salt, and the salt draws moisture out, which makes the rest of the process easier and less prone to spoilage. You put the skin then in a pickle solution, which is salt and citric acid and hot water, and that it it pickles the skin. It's an antibacterial part of the process. You take it out of the pickle, take any extra skin or tissue off, put it back in the pickle. Then you wash and dry and apply a tanning solution. So for me, I use a chemical, but I'm trying to move to something a little bit more friendly, like brain tanning. Um, then after that, it's completely tanned. You wash and dry and stretch, which is what makes them develop this white color and pliability. And then any detailing, so any repairs that you have to make, like this one was pretty damaged because of the manner of death. So I sewed a big tear in the skin back up with beads. I just thought that was a respectful thing to do. So, giving thanks. This is a really important part of the process, and you can ask anybody who hunts or does any kind of sustenance food collection from the wild. It's something that connects you to the reality of what you're doing, and it reminds you that in order for you to survive, there is the taking of other life, and that's just part of what it means to be alive, especially as an omnivore and as a predator. Even not as a predator, like, if you think about it, small creatures like insects are still sometimes taking life by eating plants all the way down. So it's not that doing so is an evil thing, I think, because there are other animals that do this, like kestrels, hawks, eagles. They eat things that are alive, and they're they do it in a way that's pretty responsible. Like, I can't think of a time where eagles or hawks have eaten an animal out of the world, but apparently this is missing for a lot of people. So we do end up in situations where we eat things to death, like fish stocks. So giving thanks is an important way to remind ourselves that what we're doing is, it's not for granted. We have to try to manage our resources and be kind to other living things. So I've made a lot of mistakes in learning this process, and here's a couple of them. My deer failure. So this deer was found on the side of the road. It was a young buck. The goal was to end up with buckskin. So some of the problems that I encountered were that I didn't cut this skin off right. I tried to kind of game the system and cut it in a way that was just very strange, and it ended up in these bizarrely shaped pieces of skin, which I don't know what I was thinking. It started raining while I was working, so the skin got wet, so the salt didn't draw the moisture out correctly because of all the water that was in it. The body was too old, kind of. I didn't have enough space to work on a big piece like this. I got lazy, and I didn't change the salt as much as I should have because it was just huge and stinky and a big mess. And my pickle was not acidic enough to prevent um, biological degradation of the skin. So bacteria got in and decomposed it while it was in the bucket in my apartment. And that was really bad. That was gross. And it was a very sad waste. I learn a lesson every time I start a project, and especially when I fail. So I learned a lot from this one. My lessons were: know what the weather is going to be, use a normal cutting pattern, pH the pickle batches, that's really important. Wear cut proof gloves because I cut my finger while I was skinning the deer, and that was kind of scary. Don't be lazy. Be realistic about what you can handle, especially space wise. I don't have a backyard. I live in a studio apartment. So, and I do most of this out of the back of my car. So I don't really have a whole lot of space. Have a plan for disposal because the Department of Natural Resources has some specific rules about what you can do with deer pieces, how you can transport them, how you need to dispose of them because of chronic wasting disease. They're trying to prevent the spread of that as much as possible. And also having a buddy who can help you. You need to lift it into somebody's truck and drive it somewhere. You can't just do it on the side of the road. So my successes were that I learned a lot, and I now have some ash lye and charcoal that I originally processed for this project, but obviously I didn't end up being able to use them. So I'm just gonna have I have those to do something else with later on. And I helped out a friend who's also learning to do this. Now, some of my successes. This is the squirrel. It was a bad hunting day, so I was driving around looking for anything to scavenge, and I didn't find anything. I was out for hours. I didn't find anything, and I came back just off the cuff. Kind of decided to drive around Milwaukee a little bit, and I found this squirrel who had just been hit by a car, and he was still warm when I picked him up. Some pieces that the tails are always difficult for me, so I'm kind of formulating a new strategy to do better on the tails. But a piece came off. The pattern is just really interesting to look at. That's a picture of the salt process. From the squirrel, I learned that I had done this after the deer, and it just really reinforced to me that I need to know when it's too late and not try to keep working on a piece that is simply too old. The deer in the bucket, when I opened the bucket, I physically recoiled from the scent. So I definitely learned that if that happens, it's probably the smell's not going to go away, and it's probably too late anyway. I learned a lot about what a squirrel's body is like, um, what the physical shapes of their bodies are, the proportions where their muscles are, um, their winter fatness. This squirrel was so greasy on the inside. You have to treat you basically just have to wash a hide with soap and water when it's really greasy because that the lipid forms uh, a glaze like a film over the inside of the skin, and that can prevent the tanning solution from penetrating and tanning the hide. So you have to deal with that. And this squirrel was so greasy. I had to wash the skin so many times and scrub the inside and scrape all the fat off. So they really do put on a lot of weight for the winter. It's really impressive. I also learned about the different toughnesses of hides. So for instance, this chipmunk is super soft and pliable, and similarly to the rabbit, which is more dry and brittle but also pliable, the toughness of this squirrel, this is the toughest hide I've ever worked with. It's so thick and strong and stiff, which means that I probably have a little bit more work to do working it to get it to be pliable. But just the difference between species and the thickness of their skin after the tanning process has been done is really interesting to me. And from the squirrel, I also learned a lot about stuffing and sewing and how to mount, which I'm working on. Something else that's really interesting about squirrels, I've always been interested in this specifically about squirrels, but this really just hammered it in for me is that there's so much variation in colors between squirrels of the same species. If you've ever been to any like Ivy League college campuses, they always have a big squirrel population with really unique kind of strange color morphs that you don't really find in wild squirrels, which is I hope that I have the opportunity to work on that and have and be able to see different squirrels or any of the same species next to each other because I find that extremely interesting, the variation within the same species. It really helps you observe how every animal is an individual, and the way that they the things that define them in their life, the other members of their species that they involve in their lives, like they had faces and they were able to be told apart from each other, which is something that I feel like a lot of people don't really think about or do unless you have some regular visitors to your backyard or something like that. It's really easy for most people to just kind of see one squirrel and think that all squirrels are exactly the same, that they don't have intelligence or care about their lives. Squirrels are just one instance of that, but I think that behavior can be found all over the place. So I volunteer at the Urban Ecology Center Riverside all the time, and I gave them one of the chipmunk hides so that they could display the hide. I also wrote a short essay about the chipmunk. You should go visit and see and ask to see it. These are some excerpts from what I wrote. The experience of skinning roadkill gives me a look into their bodies and lives and always brings with it a sense of intense peace, curiosity, appreciation, and purpose. Gives me a chance to sensorially experience parts of animals I would never otherwise feel, the way a chipmunk's fingers flex, their ability to tightly grip and to control their fingers and toes. This makes sense given that their lives depend so much upon maneuvering the features of the earth quickly and quietly. I learned to appreciate the finely tuned senses of animals. Eastern gray squirrels have whiskers all along their stomachs, on their arms, feet, and faces. These specialized hairs penetrate deeply into the dermis, making them very sturdy and secure, and they have different forms and colors depending on their position on the body. Stiff black whiskers on the face, arranged carefully, and delicate, almost translucent white whiskers on the body, gleaming like snow. As a human, I don't share the experience of whiskers, unless you count this. But observing them in death changed the squirrel from a backdrop element of parks and suburbs to a thinking creature who is sensitive to his environment and intentional in his movements through it. As you can see here, the whiskers on the face have a deep attachment on the inside of the mouth. That's one thing that I had learned from this chipmunk, that I've cut around the whiskers because when I was removing the skin from the face, they were so deeply connected that I would have had to lop off a bunch of extra tissue to keep them connected, which I opted to do with the squirrel because the whiskers are just such an important part of the way that they live, and it's really important to preserve that in the specimen, I think. So, species loneliness. Let's return to the concept of nearness. So, species loneliness is a new psychological concept that's used to describe a feeling of dissatisfaction, discontent, sadness that humans experience in our built environment that's thought to be a result of isolation from the natural world. Systemic efforts to eradicate nature from human living environments, to move us as far as possible from nature, and to structurally segregate different classes of human activities result in a lonely world. I was at a conference where this woman who worked as a TV show host for a wildlife program for kids described her upbringing in contrast to other people who are in the conservation field who are maybe more outdoorsy as kids who had hiked a lot or whatever. She's described her upbringing as being very urban, so she didn't really get outside a lot because there was nowhere to go. And she described this in the term nature deficit syndrome, which I've heard people throw around recently. Um, I think that this is a huge consequence of the way that we've structured the built environment and the way that human activities are isolated from everything else. Pest control, I mean, the way that cities are physically structured, it definitely isolates people from each other and from things that are necessary for life. So let's return to this concept of nearness. It's a physical and psychological concept. I've included a quote from this book that I read recently, Global City Blues. This book is awesome. It's about architecture, um, and the whole concept of the book is that the built environment has a huge impact on the way that cities function and the way that the quality of life for people who live in cities. And city planners and architects just throw this out the window because the way that the architectural scene is very much like you focus on your building is not part of anything else, it's not part of a greater whole, and that's simply um, not a practical way to build a city. Daniel Solomon, the author, has observed this, and he touches on this concept in these passages. What he says is, we know that something is wrong when our desk is 75 feet from a window that doesn't open and that transmits only 15% of the light of the day. We know that something is wrong when every day at lunch, everybody looks like us, is the same age, and does the same kind of work. We know that something is wrong with tasteless food that comes from the steam table, streets with no people on them, and places where we rarely see people, poorer or richer or older than ourselves, are somehow troubling. In many ways, our recent patterns of making buildings and towns tend to deny us this life sustaining exercise, and now we routinely experience the condition that philosopher Martin Heidegger referred to as loss of nearness. The central concept of Heidegger's writings, being in the world, establishes a fundamental relationship between our consciousness and the context of our lives. So, if you're here, you probably have some interest in repairing this situation. And for all of the negative consequences that come with human settlement, they are uniquely able to heal. Some ways that I know some of you are applying this concept of repair is reading, artwork, getting hands on, getting the word out. So, a couple of my recommendations for books are Braiding Sweetgrass. This book is all the rage and for good reason. This book, Global City Blues. I also have my foraging book, which has a lot of uh, has a lot of pictures. It even has color plates if you're into that sort of thing. But the concept of responsibility is mentioned in that book, and it's something that's really important to remember when we are doing activities like foraging. So I really appreciate that book as a resource. Drawing, writing, painting, music, crafts, photography, any other crafts you can think of, gardening, hiking, bird watching, the Christmas bird count, collecting fallen leaves, advocacy, volunteering, and just talking to people. Convenience is the enemy of presence and the destroyer of nature. So, whatever you do choose to do to start that repair, put in some real effort, learn a new skill, do something that does take some extra effort if you have the time, do something that you don't normally do. We didn't make it to where we are by giving up in terms of conservation and progress. To fix our world, we have to give effort in caring for it and consciously loving the place we live. This is a principle of land management and basically the same idea as the principle of nearness. We need to pay attention to where we are and care about it. I think people spend a lot of time living in this internet cloud world, and that's partially as a self-preserving reaction to the reality of the fact that our cities and towns are not serving us the way that they need to. So we need to stop doing that and pay attention to what's going on and try to fix it. This is the clipping from my foraging guide that I liked, where he says, most of us are no longer dependent on the land for our sustenance, and we have lost the ability to discern the negative consequences of our acts. A prime intent of many conservation organizations is to bring man into closer contact with the natural environment. Only by doing so will the general populace achieve an understanding of the delicate balance that exists between all living things and learn to respect the plants and animals around them. Encouraging people to use their powers of observation to find food in the wild will increase their awareness of the natural processes, which ties into responsibility, something that I worry about with this hobby. I don't do a whole lot because there's not a whole lot of roadkill in the city. I have to go out and drive to find it. But popularity and overuse is, I've seen it happen with foraging. Like you can go to the store and get a little mug that has a foraging for mushrooms kind of little sticker on it, and people don't respect the idea of only taking what you're going to eat, only taking what you need, leaving enough for other people, leaving enough so that the plant or mushroom or whatever can survive, leaving enough so that the environment can continue to function as needed with that living thing in it. And I've heard a lot of horror stories of people who go out foraging and they see somebody walking back off the trail with, buckets full of mushrooms, and they took them all and there's none left, and they're so happy about this without applying this concept of responsibility and thinking about how what you're taking is part of a network of life that is it needs to be protected. Otherwise we have system failures of environments, and that is just a terrible thing to witness. So in this book, Braiding Sweetgrass, there was a concept introduced called the honorable harvest, which is kind of a thought concept cluster that you can apply your own meanings to and your own ideas about. But here are some of the made up kind of tenets of this idea from this book. Know the ways of the ones who take care of you so that you may take care of them. Introduce yourself, be accountable as the one who comes asking for life. Ask permission before taking and abide by the answer. Never take the first and never take the last. Take only what you need, take only that which is given. Never take more than half, leave some for others. Harvest in a way that minimizes harm. Use it respectfully, never waste what you have taken. Share, give thanks for what you have been given, give a gift and reciprocity for what you have taken, and sustain the ones who sustain you, and the earth will last forever. In this book, the never take more than half concept was also used in a global context. So a couple of countries have signed on to this 30 by 30 plan, meaning that 30% of their land mass will be covered as protected nature reserve land. And obviously, that is not um, going so well for all the countries who have signed on. And I think it's been proposed that the United States will pull out of this plan in the next couple of years. But 30% is a good start. I don't think that it is enough because that's not a lot to regenerate from, but it's a start. So, my closing notes: the positive functions of taxidermy are the immense value that it may bring to science, memorable ways it can directly involve people with animals, a respectful way to make use of a living creature that was killed before the right time by a human. Touching is and being tactile is a really important part of the learning process. Children do it, adults do it, and giving somebody the permission to touch an animal, I think it activates something within them that's much more attentive and thoughtful than just seeing a picture or watching a movie, because it directly involves one of the senses, and that's something that has been kind of programmed out of daily life, having multi-sensory experiences. A lot of people spend a lot of time online or on their phones or watching movies, which is, you know, whatever, people are going to do what they're going to do, but it definitely robs you of a lot of your own sense, being in touch with the world around you, being aware of the world around you. And I think the sense, being able to turn something around in your hands and touch it and look at it and maybe smell it a little bit, is very helpful in getting people to care about something and realize that what they're handling used to be alive. Respect drives practice that is conservative of what we need to live. Gratefulness follows respect. Practicality follows gratefulness. So here I say the danger of closing your eyes. And what I mean by that is willful ignorance and the self preserving instinct to ignore negative change in the world. When we ignore challenge, we succumb to it. And when we ignore destruction, it proliferates. As we ignore opposite viewpoints, opposers shut their eyes in turn, and we all lose an opportunity to teach and understand and to build community. Awareness of the world is a trait that appears to be in decline. This may be due in part to the failures of our city planning and of the way life functions in general, and this pursuit of convenience, technology, and efficiency. Be wary of the word maximize. I also mean in the danger of closing your eyes in reference to those who have been so thoroughly domesticated that they can't bear to see a single dead animal. Our race has survived because of hunting, because of slaughter and meat processing. This is true also for amazing animals such as the falcon, the hawk, the woodpecker, and even the toucan, who is known to eat small rodents. The key is balance and reciprocity and awareness. Stay alert and allow yourself to engage with things beyond the usual scope. To heal the world, we all know some fundamental parts of our lifestyle have to change. This means going without, and it also means a beginning. A richer environment than any of us have ever known is possible. We can have this, but it will mean no Coca Cola Corporation, and it will mean you may be involving yourself in deer hunts. We have become a globally invasive species, but there is a time that this was not true. We have the unique ability to heal others. Let us use it. And my final closing note is that I make house calls. So if somebody hits a raccoon or a squirrel in front of your house, you need something disposed of. Some of my friends have asked me to preserve their pets. Give me a phone call. Any other inquiries? Send me a message. Leave me a voicemail. This is my phone number. I'm available. And now it's time for questions.